Ann Mellema identifies as a plant person, a nurse, a pagan, a grandmother, and a lifelong learner. She gardened in the sandy soil and short season of the Rocky Mountains, the fertile muck of upstate New York, the humid scratch of Appalachia, and now the searing heat and volcanic sediment of the high desert of California. And it all connects. Let's welcome Ann as our speaker this morning.
Almost forgot to unmute. Good morning, friends. Today I get to share something I've learned about nature and community and gardening and how I think they relate to human civilization and politics. Studying how plants interact helps us see our world more clearly. I'll start with how native plants manage in a balanced ecosystem, focusing on the role of mycelium, forming an underground infrastructure and safety net. I'll also look at what things might disrupt that balance. Next, I'll introduce some words that have meanings for both the plant world and the world of human politics. And finally, a vision for a way forward with a healthy, regenerative society that takes its cues from the natural world. When I left Southwest Virginia, I'd become a fan of the native rhododendrons and witch hazel and azaleas, the oaks and the jewelweed. When I arrived in California onto a seemingly barren patch of real estate, a neighbor turned me on to a native pollinator garden program. If I could plant 70% native plants in a small area, I would get a $100 voucher for the native plant sale in the fall. It was enough of a carrot to get me started. I talked to locals. I read garden blogs. I recommend Las Palitas Nursery. I looked up the California Native Plant Society, and I planted and killed off a number of things. But what I learned was that in this harsh environment, plants naturally social distance. The resources are spread too thin for there to be plenty for everyone all the time. So they slow the growth down, maybe go dormant through the heat of summer, maybe skip flowering until a wet year. And many connect to the mycorrhizal network. Mycelium is fungus, the narrow strands you would find underground, or say in an old rotten log that pop up as mushrooms when it's time to spread their spores. When mycelium connects roots to one another, we call it the mycorrhizal network. When a plant connects to the network through its root tips, it can share resources. The mycorrhizal network brings them precious water their roots alone can't reach. The network gets sugars from their photosynthesizing partners above ground. The network redistributes and makes more available the minerals and nutrients the plants need to thrive. This is sustainability. This is living well on just enough. If you want to learn more about this without, reading science, I recommend the fictional book, The Overstory, which sneaks in the botany inside an engrossing story. I also learned a new term, rooteroles. Originally just a word for weeds, it now refers to plants that put all their energy into growth and reproduction. Greedy suckers. They need a ton of resources to flower and fruit and seed, and they don't share. They have short lives. We know them mostly as domesticated vegetables, but also as invasive species that seed and spread, taking over the territory of less aggressive species. They are favored where there is fertility, moisture, and disturbance. They don't need a fungal network. They just grab all the nutrients they can get right now so they can make more of themselves. Caveat, we don't live in a black and white world, and neither do plants. Many plants bridge that ruderal, mycorrhizal dependent categories. They can grow without mycorrhizae, without networks. They just do better with. Plants have an array of approaches to survival. Stress-tolerant plants slow way down. My local bristlecone pines can live to thousands of years. They just have learned how to let go that which isn't helping them anymore. So they look like living skeletons with just like a strip of bark down the side and one branch that still has greenery on it. Amazing survivors. Circumventors go dormant and don't flower in difficult years. My surrounding sage bushes are like that. But for long-term survival, there needs to be a network, an infrastructure, if you will. Learning all this, I started to think of the plants as my teachers. I'm struck by the parallel language of the plant world and modern politics. So, first term, diversity, biodiversity. We hear those a lot. A many-layered system is vibrant. A monoculture of factory farms or rigid societies breeds disease and weakness. Crops do better with a wild strip edging them, the traditional hedgerows. The word invasives. Well, in the plant world, it usually means something comes into an area and takes over, wipes out some part of the native culture. In the human world too. It must cause harm to the natives to be called invasive. Colonization, another word. Colonization can be like that, like the invasives, with the added implication of staying put, so the original ecosystem can't come back. Indeed, vast expanses of lawns are colonizing. They don't support the birds and bees. They're of no use to the native biodiversity. They hog water. They're often maintained with toxins that run off. And the photosynthesizing and oxygen release per square foot is pretty shoddy. One of the easiest ways to give back to nature's biodiversity is to throw a 10 by 10 tarp over a corner of your lawn and next year plant it with a nice native tree. Or even just a packet of native flower seed mix. Doug Tallamy has written a book recently, Nature's Best Hope, about conserving nature's balance in our own yards, our cities, our roadway verges. He calls it Homegrown National Park. And he has a website. I hear it's a good, nice interactive for kids. The term indigenous or native, well, what are we talking about? What evolved in this spot naturally over time? How are those people or those plants in balance with the place? How did their culture form to live with the weather, the plants, the animals, the terrain? What were the practices of the indigenous culture that helped them thrive without upending the general balance? When the first maps were made of my local area in the early 1800s, they showed water diversion channels made by the local natives, the Numu people. In nearby Yosemite, the indigenous folk did controlled burns to create meadow to attract deer. They encouraged and managed stands of oak to harvest the acorns. We can learn from the indigenous population. When I walk the desert, I look for what light, what terrain does my favorite indigo bush favor? It seems to like north-facing slopes, I've decided. How can I mimic that in my pollinator garden? We can learn from the indigenous plants. For more information along this vein, check out Braiding Sweetgrass by Robin Kimmerer, a college professor of native descent. Now, the word naturalization really appeals to me. To become a naturalized citizen, you come to this country, you find a way to fit in, not necessarily blend in, and you learn how to function in this new spot so that you are a wanted enhancement to the whole, ideally. I personally think the test is just a formality. Well, naturalized plants are somewhat the same. Something foreign brought here to be a contributing member. Once here, well, if it doesn't either go invasive or die off in the new environment, if it can reproduce on its own and hold the balance, it has a chance to naturalize. I think of the old lilacs I would see along roadsides. I thought they were natives. They looked so at home. But they are naturalized. They just found their niche in the new world. The word resiliency, the ability to bounce back, especially bounce back after trauma. Lots of layers, diversity, healthy infrastructure support resiliency. Infrastructure could refer to the mycorrhizal network or fertile soil, or it could mean transportation, schools, communication, markets for spreading both physical and ephemeral resources. We've seen how the lack of internet connectivity or a decent grocery market or good schools can cripple a community's resiliency, and how safety nets, even as simple as the blessing box, can strengthen a community. Now for the term weeding out. Well, let's keep this on a small scale. My backyard, my life, my community. We have Russian thistle here, also known as tumbleweed. It's been an invasive since 1873 when some Russian settlers brought it here. It's an all spring, all summer struggle, but if you don't want it in your yard, you weed it out with a vengeance. This year I have better tools. I brought, let's show you, my brother just sent this to me for Christmas, specifically to weed the thistles. I won't weed it out entirely, but I can make a local difference. I want to weed out the invasives in my life too. Things like racism and entitlement and the holdovers from colonialism. This is hard work, and I'm willing to do it because I have a vision for what we might create. Here's my vision, and it's a double vision, of course. Well, my pollinator garden will flourish in its slow growing way. Buckwheats and lupins will get big enough to withstand some foraging wildlife, and I won't have to protect them with chicken wire cages. The quail, the lizards, the rabbits, the squirrels will share in the relative abundance. My round patio will be a gathering spot for friends and neighbors, big enough to social distance and circular so we all feel included. In my larger vision, I want to live as a naturalized member in my community. Someone who respects both the indigenous plants and the indigenous people of this place. And they are still here, not lost in the mists of time, still here. I want to be someone who will stand my ground when the invasives are creeping into the status quo. I want to find ways to disincentivize the ruderal behavior, the greediness. I want to find my niche, do as little harm as possible, repair past harms, and leave things a little better, a little more balanced, and a little more diverse. To quote Bert Wilson, the founder of Las Politas, a native plant nursery, he said, "This plant animal grouping is like a giant web. If one strand of the web fails, there are other strands to hold the web together," unquote. We can each be a strand of the mycorrhizal network. So here are some questions, some food for thought. How do you share resources and with whom? Do you share the tomatoes you grow, knowledge of a subject, time and skills? How do you connect to the infrastructure or help build it? Are you an organizer, a grocery market worker, a library supporter, a library user? Are you an adapter, a mutator, bringing something new in? New niches to fill, needs to be met. Music, art, creativity in all its forms, increase diversity, increase resiliency. Are you a mother tree, the strong old tree that connects to its family through the mycorrhizal network, feeding the small ones that are shaded from the sun, sending out chemical signals of wisdom to protect the connected forest? Are you that to your family or to your circle of friends? There's a website, mothertreeproject.org, related to Susan Simard's work. And that's another thing if you want to know more about the mother tree and mycorrhizal networks. So, what kind of plant do you identify with and why? What cues do you notice? Thank you so much.